Okay.
Hi, Prahlad. Tell me something about yourself.
So my name is Prahlad, and I am working currently at Deloitte, India, as a consultant. And I have been working on a project which is for a leading European automotive client, and they have a huge application on Salesforce. And I am a part of that application in the customer and leads bundle. So my main focus on that project is to work on Sales Cloud objects, mainly like leads, contacts, accounts, and to some extent opportunities. And I am mainly working as a developer. So most of my time in that project has been working on custom code functionality and working on Apex triggers, automations, integrations. I have worked on LWCs for specific requirements, and I have also built LWCs to be displayed on the communities. So most of our use cases for LWCs were in the communities, and we had a middleware, MuleSoft. So most of our integration procedures went through MuleSoft, and we have integrated, our team and me, I have also worked on integration scenarios. So mostly Apex development, LWCs, and since most of our automation is already based on Apex, so it is difficult for the project to migrate on flows as of now. And previous to Deloitte, I was working at Accenture as associate software engineer, and there I was working for a beverage client based in the US. And they had their application on Sales Cloud mostly, and I have worked there mostly on the admin part, like creating reports, dashboards, custom objects, custom fields, page layouts, and to some extent on the communities as well. And there also I have worked on a major integration, which was a point-to-point integration between Salesforce and an identity and access management system, which was used to provision access to the users, to the community, and manage their entitlements and permissions. So that was a brief introduction about myself. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. That's really going to help me. All right. So you have majorly worked on Sales Cloud and Experience Cloud, right? And
Right, sir, right.
you have worked mostly on the LWC triggers and other things as well. Okay.
Yes,
So from the communities, we'll start from the communities. Okay, because communities
right.
is something where most of us do not get to work on a lot. And whenever we display our Lightning Web component in the community, the real challenge we face is that how to make that, that Lightning Web component secure. And let's say if we are displaying some data from the Salesforce database, or if we are pushing some data from your LWC component to the Salesforce database, then how do you manage that? Plus, are we going to expose that Lightning Web component to the unauthorized user or the external users who are our guest users? They need not to log in or something.
So basically, most of our security aspects would be handled in Apex. So we need to make sure that our Apex class is running in with sharing context. And in case if the users of the guest user site do want to update data, then the only resort is to use without sharing. And mostly what security aspect we need to take in consideration is that we need to make all the DML operations secure in the user mode, and to fetch all the fields in the query in user mode, and use user mode operations mainly, and to check the relevant profiles to display the LWC to the users. So that can be done via the wire adapter also, to fetch the user profile, and depending on the user profile we can display the data. Also, external OWDs play an important role in displaying what data is to be shown to a user, and sharing sets also limits the number of records or the records that a user can see in the community. So these are combined aspects that we use to secure our data to external users or guest users in the portal.
Okay, I have two Lightning Web components. Okay, one Lightning Web component is a generic Lightning Web component which is not interacting with the database. It is, let's say, it's a EMI calculator where you will enter the
Right,
amount, you will enter the tenure, and then it will and the interest rate, and it will calculate the EMI. It is
right,
interacting with the database. Whereas on the other hand, we have another Lightning Web component, which is interacting with the database and showing some data from the account and passing some data to account. My guest
Right.
user is able to access the EMI calculator, but not able to
Right.
access the other Lightning Web component. So what could be the
Um, So if the Lightning Web component that is interacting with the database, we first need to ensure if the controller, in case there is any controller on that class, an Apex class, we first need to ensure that that Apex class access is provided to that profile of the user who is accessing the Lightning Web component. If we have the profile access, then we need to check if in which context the class is running. So if the context of the class is a with sharing context, then in that case, we need to check the profile of the user. If the user has access to records of that database, records of that object and to the object itself, then the user will be able to perform interaction with the database through that Lightning Web component. Otherwise, we will need to do our due diligence on whether we need to provide access to that user or not. So basically, it depends on the object access and the record level access. So sharing sets also play a major important role in that case. If we are entitled to see that record which is being fetched by the data LWC through account object or not. So in that case, we will take a step-by-step approach to see where the permissions are lacking.
okay? Yeah, so there are multiple folds to it. Like the guest user profile has permission to account, and OWD is also basically provided. The external OWD is there, uh, but
Okay.
how will we check the record level sharing of, because he's a guest user and every guest user will have same profile. How will we check the record level sharing for that particular record? Let's say I'm displaying account.
So yeah. So we may have sharing rules on that object. We may have sharing sets in place. So if in for sharing sets, we generally check if any of the records fields are matching with the user's account field. So basically lookup check we do in sharing sets, and to users of the community, we when we enforce sharing sets, they are only able to see those records. And if there are any records that are manually shared with them via public group or a manual share or by something by a mechanism that shares the records apart from the OWD. So in that case, we need to check those things, the access related issues.
Yeah, because he's a guest user, he'll not have any account at all. So we will not be able to check. And sometimes it is okay that he is not able to see a particular Lightning Web component because we might have designed it in a way that we don't want to display it to external users. They will only be able to see the limited things. So how
Yeah,
different
we
sets are from the sharing rules?
So sharing rules are basically of two types. Sharing rules can be a criteria-based sharing rule and an owner-based sharing rule. So in criteria-based sharing rules, we enforce certain criteria that is present on the record we want to share and to which user we want to share that record. Maybe it is a public group or a user. It depends on the criteria of the record. Suppose we want to display a opportunity for which amount is greater than a certain value. That is an instance of criteria-based sharing rule. And owner-based sharing rule can be records owned by a certain user or a certain queue. We want to share with a certain set of users that are in a public group or a particular user or a portal user. So in that case, it's a owner-based sharing rule. While in case of sharing sets, it's a bit different. In sharing sets, generally when we give access to the portal, we have a contact and then we have an account related to that contact, and those contacts are related to a user which is an external user, and those users are able to log in into the portal. So in the portal, the account of the contact may have certain lookups, and the user may have certain lookups to the account. And when certain fields of the record and that account or the user's account match with each other, then in that certain criteria we display the information to the user. So sharing set is not classified like or an owner based sharing or criteria based sharing. It depends on the record fields and the user's contacts or accounts fields. So Yeah, suppose we have a quote. So quote is related to an account, and user has a contact, and then to contact we have an account. So those two things, when it will match, then the record will be shown to the user.
Can we still use sharing rules to provide record level sharing of a record to external user?
Yes, I think we can use sharing rules to provide access.
Then sharing
The external, sorry, sir.
then what's the need of sharing sets if we can still use sharing rules?
Sharing sets, I think, is a way to restrict to some extent the records that are being shown to the user. And sharing rules, I think, share a broader range of records. So I think they coexist in a certain way, but I am not exactly sure of the difference between sharing set and sharing rule, why we interchangeably use those two things.
Did you identify any scenario where you were not able to do something in the communities with the help of Lightning Web Component and needed to use Aura component for that?
So I have not exactly I have not exactly faced any such scenario that needs to be done by Aura components. Um, I'm trying to think, but I don't remember that there is any possibility of
Okay,
that sort.
all right, no problem. So, when we create a new community, there is something called LWR,
Yes.
like different types of template available for community, like for customers, for partners. There is one something called LWR. What is it?
Right. So LWR is basically Lightning Web Runtime. It is a type of template that has been launched by Salesforce in the recent times, and that improves the performance of the community in a drastic way. It is based on the latest web standards, and I think it is faster than the traditional Aura or build your own template that we were using. And it has some advantages and some limitations as well. In terms of limitations, I think Aura was more customizable, and to a certain extent, we were able to edit the head markup or something like that in Aura more customizable than in the LWR templates. But overall, the latest technology is LWR, and we have a faster runtime available here, and it supports the latest web standards.
All right. Okay. Have you ever sent surveys from Salesforce?
Surveys.
Yeah, like
Um,
satisfaction survey to your partners or something like that.
So basically, I have just explored the survey part, and in the surveys, we can create different types of questions. We have question types, like it can be a rating or it can be a feedback, text area, those kind of things. And when we are done with creating a survey, we can create a public link to send it to our users via email or something, so that they can send their response on that survey, and they can probably rate the experience they had with our company. So I was also exploring, since surveys are a product that is chargeable via Salesforce, I think. So I was also trying to build my own Lightning Web component that can be used as a survey, and I was putting some questions inside a custom metadata and fetching those questions. I had created a question type field there, and like dislike type of field, and those kind of things I was exploring, because there was a POC that was a low cost POC, and we had to build something on our own. So surveys was not in the picture. So I was trying to explore something of that sort.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yes, Salesforce standard surveys has certain limitations in terms of
Right.
number of surveys and all. We cannot send,
Mhm.
I think, more than 300 with free available surveys and all. And then we need to
Yeah, right.
add Salesforce if we want to increase it.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yes. Okay. Uh, let's talk about how often do you get to work on the admin related things in Salesforce?
So not very often, to be honest, because we have functional folks who are working on admin related stuff. But in my previous organization, prior to Deloitte, I was working at Accenture. There, when I started out, I had a decent amount of exposure on admin part, and I was working on data modeling, custom objects, custom fields, page layouts, reports, dashboard, record type, sales process, those kind of things. So yeah, I'm comfortable to answer questions on admin part also, because it's an important aspect.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say if I have a approver, okay, there is a user A who is approver in an approval process. Okay.
Right.
Uh, Now when we are sending a request for the approval, okay, if we freeze the user A, like user A has been freezed, will we be able to
Mm-hmm.
submit approval for a approval request to him, or how will it work if he is freezed?
I think if the user is freezed, it's still active, and we can send approval requests to that user. Freezing basically means that that user will not be able to log in until we unfreeze or unlock that user. But I think any requests for approval can still go to him, because if that user is activated or unlocked or unfreezed to be precise, then that user can still log in, and in his list of items to approve, he can still approve that request. So I think I'm not really sure, but deactivating a user, we cannot send a approval request, but freezing a user does not deactivate it essentially. So we can send approval requests to that user.
So we can send the request, but can the approver will be able to approve via email or something? Like he cannot log in the Salesforce, he's freezed, but he can will he be able to approve via the email?
Um, Let me think. I'm not really sure. I think he will be able to, but mm, I'm not really sure on this answer. But by intuition, I can say that he will not be able to approve this request, because there should be some type of mechanism to prevent it from happening. But I'm not really sure. I need to explore more on this after this interview.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. No problem. All right. Have you worked on flows?
Not much on real scenarios, but I have practiced few scenarios from Udemy courses and other courses that I do in my free time when I am learning more about Salesforce.
So, in a scenario where you have to do an automation, how will you decide if you should go for a flow or you should use Apex for a particular thing?
So basically, it depends on the complexity of the problem in the first place. If something can be achieved by flow, if it's a simple automation, or that something that can be achieved by flow without using custom complex data sets like map or map of maps or something like that, in that case, we will go with flow. Because flow can be modified if without a developer in place, with an admin as well. But in case of complex scenarios, we always prefer Apex over flow. And we also take one important factor into consideration, that what is the existing automation framework in our project. So if all the automation is based on Apex, and our project is a bit old when flows were not that powerful, then mostly all the automation is based on Apex. In that case, we will enhance that Apex to you to achieve our scenario. But in case we are free to use any automation tool, then if it's a simpler requirement, we'll go with the flow. Otherwise, because Salesforce is improving flow day by day, we can still make callouts now as well. So flows are becoming powerful, and I think it's the way forward. So based on the complexity, we'll be able to decide.
Did you find any limitations of flows? Like while you working on flows, did you find any problem like this is not good or this is not working?
So flows, basically, it's difficult to debug as compared to Apex, where we have finer level of details that are being logged in the Apex logs, and we can even add debugs at various points where we want to check which point the transaction has reached. But in flow, sometimes we cannot get very informative error messages, or it cannot be really helpful as a admin or a developer to debug where it is going wrong. So in case of debugging, first of all, and flow debugger, which is a tool, that tool is a standalone tool. Like, it is not simulating the entire transaction that a record goes through in its life cycle. But when we do a Apex transaction, it follows the entire order of execution. So in that case, we are not 100% sure if that flow will be affected by any other process in that transaction, which can hamper its sanity. So these are a couple of different limitations to flows. And obviously, Salesforce is working on improving these day by day. So we might be able to debug easily in the future.
Can
So
you
yeah,
call can you call a Lightning Web component from your record triggered flow?
from a record triggered flow, I don't think so. But in a screen flow, I think we will be able to have a Lightning Web component. I think record triggered flow runs in the background. It's like a trigger flow. Yeah.
Okay, and can we call a screen flow from a Lightning Web component?
I think there is support for calling screen flows in Lightning Web components recently. But I'm not really sure. I need to explore on that. In flows, we can add Lightning Web components, but in Lightning Web components, we can add flows or not. I'm not really sure. I will need to explore that part.
Okay, in which context does the flow runs? Like there are different types of
Right.
flows. I want you to explain
Hmm.
the running context of the flows.
So it depends on where the flow is called from. If it's called, so suppose it's an auto launch flow and it's called from a invocable in some kind of Apex action. So
Mhm.
it depends on what kind of Apex action it is being called. So if suppose Apex action is running in without sharing context, then the flow will run in system context. And we have, I think, an option to set in which context the flow should run. So in the system context or in the user context, I think for record triggered flows, we can set that in the flow itself. So yeah.
Okay. Have you explored the flow orchestrator?
To be honest, no. I have not explored Flow Orchestrator, but as per the description, it says it can be for multiple users, multiple objects, and some organizing of flows together. I am not really sure, but yeah, I have not worked on it, to be honest.
Okay, okay, no problem. Okay, can you tell me how do we get the information related to the device in Lightning Web component? Like I want to know on which device I'm logged in. Will I be able to get it in the Lightning Web component?
Yes, you will be able to get it in the Lightning Web component. I think there is something called form factor. There is a module from which you can import the form factor of the device you are working on. Syntax I should see after this interview, but I think you should be able to get
And if I want to know about the browser,
the browser in the sense like
like
if you're using Chrome or
Firefox
Firefox.
or Chrome, yeah, just like that.
Mm, I'm not really sure. I think even on general web applications, there is some way to find. And since JavaScript is based on ES6 framework, then most of it is web standards. So I think there should be some kind of a mechanism to figure out what browser you are on. So I think Mozilla is a different some in CSS. Sometimes we put some different descriptors from Mozilla Firefox and all. So there should be a way of identifying
All right.
what it is.
Can you tell me when we should use the rendered callback?
So rendered callback is a lifecycle hook. And when the component is rendered, basically then rendered callback is called after connected callback. So suppose there is a use case that you have a template if true directive written in your Lightning Web component. And to in that template if true directive, you have an HTML or a div tag, some kind of div tag, and you want to insert some text into that. So you are trying to use the template.query selector to find out the tag and insert some HTML inside it. But if you directly do that in not inside rendered callback, you will be getting an error that that part that rendering has not yet been done on the uh, component, because the property that is being used inside the template if true may be set to false. So inside that it is not rendering yet. So if you try to access by a template.query selector, it will fail. So in rendered callback, you can check if that part has rendered or not, and then you can insert that HTML inside that template if true tag. So when a template is rendered completely, in that case, rendered callback is called, and we can check if certain parts of that page has rendered or not. In that case, we can use rendered callback.
All right. Okay. So can you tell me when we should use constructors then?
Constructors we can use when suppose I have one use case that we need to add an event listener to the Lightning Web component. Suppose I have a grandparent component and I have a grandchild component that is firing an event which bubbles and it's composed. So in that case, by default, it will not be able to handle that event unless we add a event listener. So in constructor, we can add a event listener to handle that event. So that's the part. And the constructor, I'm not able to remember any particular use case apart from this because I have not honestly used constructors much in my Lightning Web component journey.
Okay. So if we have a component which has grandparent as well as grandchild, both. Okay. Can we fire an event and transmit that event to both childs and parents and partner, like grandparents and grandchilds from a single event?
From a single event, from grandchild, we will definitely be able to pass an event to the grandparent by using bubbles and composed. We need to set bubbles as true and we need to set composed as true. From parent to child, we can use public properties as well, and we can use capturing phase as well. But capturing phase I have not used, to be honest. Public properties I have used extensively, but yeah, if there are suppose for one grandparent component, we have two grandchild children components, we can definitely communicate between them effectively. There is no issue.
Okay. Fine. I am getting actually the Apex long running job error. Like my transaction is failing and giving me this error that Apex long running job, something like that. What could be the issue?
Apex long running job. So basically, it can come boil down to if you have a query that's running for long, if you have a large data set that is committing to the database, then that case it can be a long running job. If we have not followed the best practices of writing code, then it can be a long running job. So basically, it boils down to the nature of code that is written in that particular transaction. If it's a long running job, I think it has crossed the time limit, CPU time, I think. So in that case, we can use different ways to debug, but it's not going to be easy if you have a long running job, unless you know the pinpoint from where it is firing.
See, CPU timeout is only 10 seconds. And CPU timeout does not count the database time. Okay, it excludes
Yes.
the base related operation. So this long running job has different limit. It is 120 seconds, I guess. Yeah, it is I think 120 seconds. We sometimes set the timeout limit in the callouts, right?
Yes, 120,000. That's the maximum limit a call out can run.
So Apex CPU timeout limit does not count this part, okay, because that is for the whole transaction, and this is different.
We can have nested loops that are running. That can
That will definitely come in the Apex CPU timeout because that is counted against the transaction. So okay,
right.
let's come to the CPU timeout then first. How will you identify CPU timeout?
So we'll get a error message like we get for all the DML, all the governor limits in place for Salesforce. So we'll get a error that's stating that CPU timeout. Database operations definitely do not count to CPU timeout, but to start debugging CPU timeout, we can use the prospective manager in the developer console to check what operation we performed and how much time it took. So we can drill down on what type of transaction, what part of the transaction is taking more time. If it's a flow, it's a workflow rule, it's an approval process, what is taking longer time. So we can isolate that issue and then we can start debugging slowly and gradually. And where it is failing, we can reach to that point.
Okay. Let's say we identified that our opportunity transaction is taking a lot of time. So whenever we are, let's say, updating an account, that is triggering the opportunity as well, and that transaction is taking
Hmm.
a lot of time. How we can, how we can do some things to avoid this?
So first thing that comes to my mind while dealing with something like this is that if there is something that we don't need to do immediately in the synchronous transaction, we can move it to an asynchronous part. We can use a future method or a queuable which can run later at a later point of time. So that is one. And we can put appropriate checks to fire a certain logic based on suppose the opportunity is updated. So in not all cases that we need to fire it, we will put certain checks that this operation should not fire in a certain condition. So these are a couple of things that I have personally used in my project to keep a check on the performance.
Have you used platform events?
No, I've not used platform events, and basically, I know it's something like a custom object, and we can create fields on it, and we can have different flows or triggers that can subscribe to those events and perform certain operations.
Mhm.
But to be honest, I have never worked on platform events. It was not a part of any of my projects.
No problem. That is fine. So I want you to identify more on the long running job type of error and how do we rectify that. Basically,
Hmm.
we need to do some event monitoring and need to see what is going wrong, which jobs are taking a lot of time, and then once we identify the jobs, then it will be easier for us to correct them. Okay.
Sure, sure.
All right. Okay. And have you worked on a trigger framework?
So we had a handler framework in place where we had triggers and we had trigger handlers. But I know about a factory pattern also, which I was exploring. So these are the two different frameworks I have experienced myself. In the handler pattern, you create logicless triggers and just check which is the context of the currently executing trigger. And based on that, we call methods from the handler class that handle those operations, and in turn can call utils class or any helper class. So that is the handler pattern. And for trigger factory pattern, we can create an interface that can have multiple methods that need to be implemented via the developer who is writing the handler classes. And it creates a blueprint of what needs to be done by the developer so that he cannot basically do anything he wants, and always follows the best practices for all the triggers that we write on any subject in our org. So yes.
What advantage does they bring? Like if I normally create a trigger and normally do all those operations, how different? What difference will it make in the back end?
In the backend, like you are talking about, suppose we write all the logic in the triggers instead of handler classes.
Yeah.
So basically, triggers run in system context, and triggers running in system context, we don't always want everything to run in system context. Also, it will make it harder to debug and less of a organized approach. We can have a handler class which is running in with sharing context, or we can have a handler class which is running without sharing or inherited sharing or anything else. We can control the context of that running class basically. But if you write all the logic and triggers, it will run in system context. Plus we have reusability. Suppose we want to use a particular piece of code from that handler class in some other class, we'll be able to use that. But if you write everything in the trigger, that will only fire on an event in the database. So yeah, that can be a couple of advantages.
If a class is getting called from a trigger and trigger is running in the system context, will the class will still run in the user context or system context?
It depends on the access. modifier, I think. If it's a with sharing context or without sharing context, if trigger is calling the class and that is written in with sharing, the execution of that class will be in with sharing. If the trigger has called the class
With sharing of
which is without,
sorry to interrupt you. Okay, a trigger is running in the system context and it is calling a
right.
class. Okay, that class is with sharing. Okay, so
Mhm.
it will run in the with sharing context, but with sharing context of which user?
With sharing context of the logged in user who is performing the DML, suppose delete, insert, update, or things like that.
I'm
So
going to double
logged
check
in user.
this. Okay.
Okay, sure.
All right. When we create a particular Apex class, how do you decide the access modifier? Like whether that class should have public or private? I just want to understand the logic behind that. Like, how do you decide if I'm going to write a private class or a public class or a global class?
So basically, public and global. So public can be used in the org anywhere, and global basically can be used outside of our org. So when we write web services, for example, we have to check that the class has access modifier global because it needs to be exposed to the external world to be used by APIs. So if public, we use the generally mostly we use public so that it can be used inside our entire org, and we can access methods of that class. Private, for example, we can use in test classes, which system admins generally run while deployments or while running the test classes. So in that case, they have anyways access to author apex and all the system permissions, so they can we can have test classes as private.
But why
So
do we
these
make,
are some of the.
but why do we make them private? Like what harm are they going to make if we make them public?
I think it will not make any harm to make them public. I'm not really exactly sure, but in private, generally when we write test classes, we have a private modifier so that any methods cannot be accessed outside that class. Like I'm not sure about the point of calling a test class method outside that class. Mm, I'm trying to think.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I think so. That's all for today. This is your first mock, so I think that should be all. I have not covered couple of the topics because I want you
Sure,
to work on few topics and then we will take a full-fledged again another mock on this. Okay, let me stop.
sure, sure.